What's up, YouTube? This is PN Collector here. Just want to go over a few kind of things that have been kind of going through my mind about Yu-Gi-Oh! And just pretty much how the metagame's been kind of following through. Right now, about in front of you, you're probably looking at a bunch of cards differently from different decks. I pretty much have kind of given them the nickname the CP9. You guys kind of watch One Piece, you kind of know what that is, and more or less how I see it is that these seem to be the 9 contenders right now that are pretty much the most standard you'll see in the format. If anything, the ones that are trying to make their place to it. And a few of the decks you can tell have different ideas, different concepts to them, and so I kind of want to go briefly into a little bit of each one, so that way you kind of get a general idea and how I kind of rank them as in terms of tiers to myself. In the very front of the beginning, of course, we have the Blackwings. Now, what Blackwings have that any other deck has is the ability to constantly give pressure to the opponent. Using Boras, using Shura, using any of the other Blackwings like Kalut, you can pretty much give constant pressure to your opponent, and even though with the loss of Whirlwind, one card in particular allowed them to get stronger, and that was the introduction to Pot of Duality being put into the deck. Pot of Duality allowed them to get to their answers faster, and that's what most of the deck needed, is as long as it can get to its cards, it should be okay to survive a few more turns. And even then, that plays a very, very big role with everything. Not to mention, too, Blackwings have a lot of outs thanks to cards like Icarus Attack or even Delta Crow Anti-Reverse, and it's things like that that allows the deck to still be a very strong contender. So even with all the constant setting, there's retaliation for that. And that's kind of one reason why Blackwings, as I see right now, as being one of the main Tier 1 decks, and it's fighting for the Tier 1 spot. And then you look at here, you have Quick Draw. Now, Quick Draw is going to have different forms. It's going to have those that choose to run Shells, those who choose to run Hamsters, those who choose to run Charge, those who choose to run a Gen X Neutron version, Gen X versions in general, actually. And Quick Draw has multiple utilities and multiple outs of different things, and it's going to continue to grow into a different deck. And what makes the deck really hard to play against is depending on the player and how one actually plays around certain situations. And that, and really in reality, is what makes the deck shine. So in the hands of someone who's really prepared to deal with a lot of problems, the deck can do really well. And especially with the support, like I said, coming out in the future, it's going to put the deck in a different direction that most players wouldn't think of it to begin with. Now, one of the bigger new options now, playing for a Tier 1 spot, Thunder King Rayo. Now, you may look at this card, I'm not referring to just Thunder King in general, I'm more or less referring to any anti-meta decks, for the most part. So pretty much anything that includes Thunder Kings, things that include Breakers, DD Warrior Ladies, whether it be Dimensional Fissure decks, I'm referring just in general as Thunder King as the anti-meta card. So decks that do that, even whether Geminis or not, you know, that just won the Gemini deck, or in terms of any anti-meta deck in general, is going to refer, Thunder Kings will refer to them. And the reason why I put this deck now labeled as a Tier 1 is because, again, Pot of Duality. Pot of Duality made a lot of these types of decks allow themselves to be further pushed. Because you look at Thunder King and you also look at Blackwings. Those types of decks based around with Thunder King, Blackwings, anti-meta decks in general, are able to get to their answers right away, thus making them anti-meta decks, because they have a reason and out to what your opponent's key cards or key plays will be. So that's why anti-meta in general is fighting to be a Tier 1 deck, because it is competing with all the other Tier 1s consistently now. And that's mainly because, like I said, it's due to Pot of Duality. Next up is X-Sabers. X-Sabers, you know, were one of the top decks last format. Now, with the inclusion of different cards, the banning of Cat, Cold Wave, there's been a big shift in playstyle for the deck. The deck may seem slower, but it's set up for still a strong push. And that's more reason why it actually, with its answers with Hyunlai, and making the bigger pushes with Fall Troll and Bogart Knight, the deck has actually been able to do quite well still in tournaments. And again, that's just based on how the player is, your player choice and your playstyle. And everything can change just in a single moment with this deck, and that's actually the reason why it should still be a very strong contender for still being a Tier 1. Now, what I see to be the last Tier 1 deck in terms of the top 5 for it right now would be anything that's related Machina, Machines, Salvo, built around Fortress. Those types of decks, I see right now anything related that's like that being contending for top 5. Recently, even in LA, from what I heard, there was most of the showing had been Black Wings and a few X Sabers and a lot of Gadget's Machina builds. And that's one of the strongest contenders right now too, because of the sheer fact that they can constantly search through the deck and get more answers. And then again, it's one of the few decks also that's backed up by Pot of Duality. And by Pot of Duality's pretty much helped tier most of these top 5 decks and put them into a different perspective. Quick Draw may not be using it, or using more than 1, 2, if anything, but overall, for most part, all 3 decks do benefit from that card, and it allows them just to make further pushes. It doesn't make them the best card in the deck to, Pot of Duality to work with all of them, but it does help the deck go into a different idea and different mentality. Now you're going to look at to here how I consider the tier 1.5 decks, which means they're not there yet of being tier 1 fighting for that position, but they're very, very close, and it just depends. Now first you look at Gladiator Beasts. Gladiator Beasts have a lot going for them. They have Gazarius, they have War Chariot, they have a lot of outs to certain plays, but with the constant pressure that all the decks are getting from them, from all the other decks thanks to Pot of Duality, or just big pushes in general, Gladiator Beasts cannot deal with so much pressure at one point. They don't have outs to every single play. They only have outs to enough to control at least each turn until they can re-catch up to the opponent. And more or less that's why they're slowly getting knocked down from being a tier 1 deck to becoming like a tier 1.5. Possibly a 2, but I still wouldn't call it a 2 yet, because what keeps them alive still is War Chariot. And now a new contender I see is E-Heroes or / Absolute Zero decks. Now, this deck is slowly gaining rise in popularity because of a lot of different deck choices like Snowman Eater, Destiny Heroes in general, Monarchs, and variants are starting to use more aspects of Absolute Zero. So E-Heroes are becoming a bigger role because of the fact that they can recover against wide monster presence. And that's kind of one of the main beneficial things about the deck, is that it's able to make bigger pushes where it didn't have any before. And hopefully with the release of future cards, just like the Shining and March, it should help the deck become a different evolution of it. So hopefully we can see it go from a tier 1.5 to possibly even a tier 1 and compete with the other 5 main decks right now. Now the last 2 decks that I consider very, very big, but I guess overlooked, it just depends on the players, is 6 Samurais and Dragons. Now 6 Samurais, biggest boost that they've had in a very long time was Gateway. And with already the release of Grandmaster and Hand of the 6 Samurai, the deck was definitely going somewhere. Now with the inclusion of Pot of Duality playing a big focus, it's now possible for 6 Samurais to get further and further to their gateways, and further to their different win conditions. And that is very, very, very dangerous in this format, especially with future sets giving them more support. 6 Samurais have the very strong potential to do something even more in this game. And right now, like I said, it's at 1.5, and hopefully trying to gain its momentum to be tier 1. And all of these decks are eventually trying to become tier 1. It's just a choice in the play style and how any player can exploit that. I mean, you look at Dragons. The Dragons did top 32. They did further progress into like other options, but they still need more support. Now, you can see here that the Dragons wouldn't seem like to be an obvious deck type, but as more and more sets get released, there's different possibilities for them to expand. Now, most of you may be wondering why I don't have Scraps up here yet, and that's mainly because we're not exactly officially sure how much that deck's going to play a role yet. So I've been testing it, it's been off and on lately. Scrap Dragon pretty much is the main win condition for that deck. But overall, though, I'm just trying to show you guys mainly that these are like the strongest contending decks right now. These are the ones with the biggest thought process that players are actually using, especially in my area. And, I mean, mainly you can say it's because of Pot of Duality, but the game as a whole has started to evolve more than it used to be. So, if you guys have any questions, you guys want to rate, comment, subscribe, PM, be free to post your replies to anything. Like I said, you subscribe, guys. Try to get as much involved in this game as possible, because this is an open conversation for you guys. What do you guys think of this? What do you guys label things as tiers? Everyone's going to have their own personal opinions. That's perfectly fine. This is generally what I think, and pretty much my thought process of how I pretty much map out the game for myself. So, like I said, you guys, leave your rate, comment, subscribe, comments in the bottom box below. Just let us know what you guys think. This is PN Collector signing out.